the fact that humans, we can only live by killing, and to become, he talks about being in intimate relationship with the fact that we need to kill to live. Because if there's, this animism is working on the fact there is sentience in everything. So the vegetable has a sentience as well as the...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the rock, the mountains, everything has a level of sentience, which is a very Indigenous way of looking at the world. And it's just that it is that honouring of being able to honour everything that we eat, and, honouring the metals in the computer, and going into a space of gratitude and honouring of what we have, rather than, okay, I've got that, what next?
And it is like that, isn't it? We're just, it's a what next mentality, opposed to going down and appreciating, especially, like, we don't grow a lot in my little plot, but you might only get 50 apples a year off the tree, and it's apple that's been growing there for 6 months. So I tend to appreciate it more. I want to know more about this Indigenous aspect of your life at the moment, or is it that you're studying?
It's been an interest that, I suppose, Indigenous wisdom in all sorts of ways has fascinated me. When I was back in my 20s, I started studying some acupuncture to go along with my physio, because just that awareness back then of something that had been around so long, and I think in the last little, my awareness of and understanding of Indigenous perspectives, when I look at it over time, has been, when I was a kid, it was that very Christianised, and my father was actually brought up in New Guinea. His father was in the missions up there. He worked as a carpenter, but there was that conversion thing that has come with colonisation, and so I know what it feels like to come from beliefs that have changed over time, and I think we are so disconnected with the land, and I love the Indigenous perspective that we don't own the land, or the concept of ownership is much more one of custodial, and it's a reciprocal relationship. And I think there is so much in that whole concept of humans as custodial species and in relationship with land and each other, that we need to get back to that. And it's not about going back to the past, it's bringing that wisdom in and marrying it together with the technologies and things that we have nowadays. And I was listening to, I don't know if you haven't had Rebel Black on here from the Rural Woman. Rebel would be another great guest speaker. And one of her workshops that I was involved with, and she had Jimmy Little's aunt, who's one of the Indigenous aunties from around there. And she made a really beautiful comment to me that felt like such a blessing of, we don't want your white fella guilt. We just want to work together. And I know I've carried a lot of guilt for things over the years, and it can be an excuse, It's easier to probably sit around and feel guilty than to go, righto, we buggered that up, but we can learn from it, because all of us bugger things up.
Continually.
Yeah, I bugger things every day.
Yeah. And there's a positive side of that as well. What can we learn from that? And, how does that jettison us forward? And what about energy? How does energy fit with our learning about connection to land, the Indigenous background, and using the energy that either, I don't know, we produce or the land produces? Has that been part of your exploration?
Yeah, because my sense is that everything is energy, and some things are solid, they appear solid, even though if you look at them at a deep enough level, there's a lot more space in us than there is solid. But it doesn't look like that.
As in, you mean the
I feel pretty solid.
fluid?
And so, it's energy vibrating at different frequencies that the world is about, and we vibrate at different frequencies to things that are invisible. And one of the concepts that I use in my coaching is that we are, each of us has a unique frequency, and life is about tuning in to what your unique frequency is, and often it's an unlearning of all of the things that we have taken on board as kids, often to handle the complexity of growing up, because it's messy learning to grow up and dealing with people. And so we do these things over time to stay in good relationship, particularly when we're little and we are at the mercy of the adults. And so then it's often a case of unpacking all of that to find out what really is the thing that gives you joy, and doing that. And that if everybody can be in that space of coherence to themselves, it's kind of like, you think of the concept of the universe is one song. It's kind of like we all become the note in that song rather than somebody else's note. And I don't know how many lifetimes it takes to do that. I have a sense possibly more than one. Always keep trying.
So this frequency, I heard joy. So you kind of, do you know your frequency if you know what brings joy to you? Is that one of the parts of the understanding?
It's an interesting question, because I used to think it was always around joy, but I think sometimes it can be not necessarily that, but there's that deeper part of you that kind of knows, but it's only quiet. It's you've really got to unwrap a lot of things to get back down to that. And sometimes like I look at the big changes, and I think it's that heart energy too, that I look at the big things that have happened in my life, and I didn't so much choose them as they chose me. And they didn't necessarily always feel joyful at the time either.
Okay. So again, like setbacks, but they can make you more resilient to take on different experiences or opportunities.
And I think sometimes they can be the reminders that you've gone off track. It's kind of, somebody had this idea come to me, those old pinball machines, that it's kind of like, they're the things that go, no, you're headed over there, you've got to get back.
Oh, I like that. And sometimes the ball goes down and comes back up again, and life goes on, doesn't it?
And often it's other people who can look at us and see our gifts better than we can. There's a concept of shadow, and there's the dark shadow, but there's our golden shadow. And if you want a really lovely thing that everyone could go home and try themselves is, think of somebody who really pisses you off, and write them a letter about all of the things that annoy them. And then think of somebody who you really admire and write down all of the qualities that you admire in them. And then go back over the letters and cross out them and put them down as about yourself, because they're both the aspects of your shadow. And owning them is a beautiful thing. But it is often other people who will see the things that we don't see in ourselves. So we need those communities to hold us up and put a balloon in our subtle narcissism when it starts to get a bit carried away.
So you need that relationship with at least a few people to ask for, what do they see? Can they see the shadows possibly, or who's the real Louise that they see?
Yeah, and you need to be aware that you choose people who you trust and who have your best interest in account, taking best interest into account, because not everybody's like that. because, and not because they're bad people, but they're still sorting their own shit out.
Yeah, that's right. We all are. So those that realise the time, Cynthia and I made an executive decision at our board meeting that we would go that little bit longer because we just find that we're running out of time when we're closing up at 1:45. But what I'll do now, Nikki, is ask you, what are your top 3 tips for us? And then we'll have a little bit of time for any Q&A from the group. What are the questions, while you're thinking of your top 3 wellbeing tips, Annalise has asked if you've got a website, which maybe Cynthia, you could type that into the chat room for
yeah, my website died, so but I do have a Facebook page under Inner Circle Work, and I'm really happy if anybody, or email, I'm happy to share email address or a phone number if anyone wanted to have a chat.
Right. Thanks for that. So your top 3.
I think one of the first for me is to stay, be curious and be vulnerable. I think as soon, and about everything, if something really piques your curiosity, go with that, because it's a nice feeling to be curious. And I think as soon as we start assuming we know everything about anything or anyone, I think that the other thing is, if you've lived with someone for a long time, you often think you know them. So to keep that sense of curiosity around the people nearest and dearest to you. And I think that's probably one of the deepest practices you can have, because it's way easier to go, I know exactly what you're thinking, or I know what you're going to do, or you always do that. So I'm really mindful that I can very much have a tendency to do that. With those nearest and dearest to me, and with myself, even to be curious with, oh, that's interesting, why did I do that? And that takes a fair bit of vulnerability to say, I don't really know this, I don't understand, rather than, there's a lot more of a reward for somebody going, yep, this is what you should be doing and this is what it's all about. And, well, nothing ever is black or white. Cynthia and I were talking earlier, there's shades of grey and everything's contextual. So stay curious and stay vulnerable.
Number 1.
I put down, eat well, move mindfully, and stay grounded.
That's number 2, isn't it? So eat mindful, stay grounded.
Eat well, move mindfully. So even to move mindfully, often a bit like the eating piece, we can be, you can do yoga, you can go to the gym, you can ride a bike, and it can be totally mindless,
Yeah, listening to something opposed to just moving.
Just being with that, And the other thing I had jotted down was stay tuned into your deepest calling. And if you know that, I use that as an inner guidance. And I'm going to throw a 4th one in there. It's just be really aware of your breath. It's probably one of the most powerful tools we have, is our own breath. If you can just stop and tune into your breath and bring it into a space where it's a nice even inhale, exhale, because when we tend to get under stress, we'll upper chest breathe and we'll hold, and that actually will totally shift your sympathetic, your autonomic nervous system into flight or fight mode. And so you can change yourself really quickly by just tuning into your breathing and letting that relax down. And it's kind of like you shift your operating system. It's a really powerful tool, and not only shifting yourself, but the energy that comes from our heart space. So what happens then is your heart rate becomes coherent, actually spreads about as far as your arms can reach. So you can actually change the climate around you. And that's pretty cool, I reckon.
Very, extremely. All right, so there's 4 tips for us. I'm just having a quick glance of any questions that might be coming through for you, Nikki. Are you able to chime in, Cynthia? What are you seeing coming through?
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to center my breath.
So Jane asks, hi Jane. Jane asks, as a coach, Nikki, how do you help people unravel and find their note?
Oh, look, there's so many different ways you can do that. I'm not a coach that's got a one size fits all. So just depending on how the person feels to me, I've got a whole lot of different ways that I do that. Sometimes it can be around getting people to look at their values. I've got a lovely tool that I use around creative constellations, which is working with people to work out their creative modes. And that's a beautiful way of looking at things, rather than, because for years I used to say to myself, I'm not creative. When all humans are creative, it's just not all creativity comes out as art per se. It comes out in different ways. So I think to understand where your creative modes are and what happens to the concept of being creative when you're coming from an open-hearted space compared to when you're in a fear space, we actually stop creating. It's really interesting. It's like this spiral that can be evolving, or it can be just imploding back on itself. So, a lot of it's around understanding how you tick, questioning assumptions. There's a whole lot of different ways to answer that one. Yeah.
Any other questions for Nikki?
Yeah, and I was just picking up here, Catherine Full was saying that she'd read the benefits of breathing, but it was about what's the difference between, which is not asking the question, but I'm curious, the difference between nose breathing and mouth breathing.
I mean, ideally we are nose breathers. I mean, on a very physiological level, we actually get more oxygen in through breathing through our nose, unless it's blocked, obviously. But it filters, our nose filters and warms air as well. So it actually it's a better way to take air into your lungs. And a lot of us are mouth breathers. I default to mouth breathing all the time because of sinusy things and whatever. But then it can become a pattern that you do when you don't have to either. But yeah, nose breathing is preferable. And there's certainly a lot of research in that area and what it does to our well-being, our autonomic nervous system, so many different things.
Yeah. Penny Flynn said, very good to remember that for the folks in Victoria wearing masks. I'm still, I don't know about anyone else, trying to get used to how to breathe with the mask on, and been trying all different masks as well to see what is getting best flow and not fogging, and it's a bit of a challenge. We're just coming towards 2 o'clock, so any questions? We might even give you the microphone to ask Nikki, if anyone in the group would like to do that before we finish up for this afternoon. Oh, okay, Catherine's saying that masks have been found to increase nose breathing.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Right.
Well, it's because you start breathing in your stinky breath when you mouth breathe. So
if you open your mouth.
Oh, yeah.
So you just start wanting to keep your mouth closed and keep going through the nose.
You need some snorkeling equipment, don't you? Pop that in there and that can let the breath there.
So Louise, we might wrap up now formally, and so I'll just hand it to you to do that. And our just before I do that, our speaker next week is going to be Sally Dickinson, who worked for Cotton Australia for a long time and now is working as a stakeholder engagement officer for the Murray-Darling Basin Commission. So that'll be very interesting. There's a lot of a lot of controversy around the Murray-Darling Basin system, and Sal I used to work with her in a program called Farm Smart in Victoria. So she's a really experienced facilitator as well, and just an all-round lovely person. So it'll be great to connect with her and hear a bit about her life next week. But I'll hand over to Louise.
So thank you, Nikki, for joining us today, and we really value your wisdom, your wellbeing wisdom that's been imparted with us. There's always a first in our lounge room chats, and we've had did you hear, Cynthia? We had a prayer that we can recite before we have our meal, which I'd say is a first for us, Nikki. So that amongst other information you shared. So thank you very much for joining us. We will stop the recording now as we go into more conversation with everyone that wants to remain, and I'll give you the microphone if you want to ask Nikki some questions. Is that okay with you, Nikki, to hang around for a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great.